Well, welcome back to the Legacy Builder Sport Discipleship Series and the leadership notes for the Legacy Builder Group for Coaching to Win God's Way. We're in week 6, and last week we gave you some homework to give your coaches, and that homework was to develop their own private quiet time with God. And they can call it going to the weight room, whatever they want, but they had to show you that they blocked out time. And again, we said it's more important to do it 5 minutes per day than just 2 hours on a Sunday. So we want them to develop habits as they go through the week. So make sure you talk about that. Ask them how their quiet times were. Ask them how it worked for them for about 10 minutes as the lesson begins, and see if they share some ideas too, because there's more than just one way to have personal quiet time with God, and it's important that they understand that is true and that's how it can work. And just find out what worked for some guys, and then encourage them to build on it. Again, the number one reason we have these groups, other than to get closer to Jesus, is to encourage one another and spur one another on to other good deeds. That's the whole deal. So let's dive into week 6. This one's called Feeding the Monster. Now, I called it Feeding the Monster because, well, in the coaching culture, especially in college, boy, and everywhere, in high school too, but and I'm even starting to find out in youth sports, it is a monster. And if you keep feeding that monster will get bigger and bigger and bigger, and ultimately it will devour you. So we want to teach our coaches that if the job is eating them up, what they need to do is reset their priorities. And again, as we dive into this lesson, the scripture that comes from Matthew 25, 14 through 30 is, again, the parable of the talents. Now, I need to be honest with you, when I didn't know a whole lot about the Bible, and the first time I heard about this parable, I thought it was about talent. Physical talents or abilities God has given you. And I didn't really understand the parable, but it's funny, as we break through this parable and go through what Jesus was teaching his disciples, he obviously was talking quite a bit about the fact that the master in the parable, again, has given each person things that are equivalent to what they can do. And again, we all have been given different gifts, all right? You know, there are people who have gifts that are in video and that can shoot these type of videos and edit them and put them all together. I obviously don't have those gifts. But then there are other people that their gift is to motivate and to form teams and to drive teams. Other people are gifted as teachers. Other people are gifted as just being great helpers to other leaders. So again, all are necessary for the kingdom of God, and all are necessary for this world. So the purpose of this lesson, though, basically, is to take the coach back. Why did they get into coaching in the first place? And let's do another little personal inventory, but this one's a little different. Let's look at, what are their giftings? Have they really in the last year or two looked at, what am I good at? What can I do? So it's important that, again, at some point in your life, somebody told you, especially these coaches, somebody told them that they had a gift for dealing with young children or teaching the sport that they're in. Here's why I did this, when I wrote this. I need you to have some insight. Back when I started coaching, I was most like most people, again, why did I get into coaching? Well, I love sports, played in college, all that kind of stuff. Had some injuries and wanted to continue to stay in the sport and wasn't going to go on to the next level, the professional level. So next best thing was to become a coach. So that was my reasons. And the other reason was I wanted to help kids just like a coach had helped me. So over time, though, it was interesting. As I became a head coach at different universities, it was interesting how the pay began to get better. The pressure began to get higher, and also my priorities started to change a little bit, in that it all became about winning. And it's important to understand that what happened to me has happened to a lot of people. Now, in your group, as you ask coaches why they got into coaching and then have their reasons changed while they're still in coaching, a lot of them will say no, they haven't. They want to help kids, love kids, make them better people, and that's just fine. But make sure they understand that a lot of guys, especially older coaches that have been around a while, that are nearing retirement, they can't retire because their stipend is so large, and they want to retire at a certain age that now they're coaching for a different reason than when they got in. So it's really good to just take them back, though, and get them back to the core root of why they got in coaching. It's about kids. That's the deal. And they're also gifted in that area. That's what propelled them into it. So anyway, the next thing we talk about here is point number 2, and we talk about the time element. And this is my favorite part of this lesson. We have a lot of fun with this. But there's a creed out there, the coach's creed, and it's not on any walls anywhere, but it is amongst all of us, and that is, you will leave no stone unturned. And I'll tell you, there's a guy out there coaching right now. Well, there's a number of guys out there coaching right now, especially in the professional ranks. But there's one guy in particular, and I won't name his name, but he is famous for the fact that he sleeps at the office, and he works 18 hours a day, and he wins because of it. Now, He's one of many, but I need to understand, and you need to let those coaches reiterate, the culture breeds that. We are taught that we can outwork, outorganize anybody. I may not have as much talent as you, but I can outwork you. Well, the problem with that is we start to think about, okay, what stones haven't I unturned? And what stones are out there? So now, for instance, in football coaching and basketball, how much videotape can I watch? I mean, is it enough to just watch one videotape of the game? Do I need to watch it again? Because maybe I missed something that time, and I need to watch it again. Well, I'll tell you this. I was on staffs where we'd sit and watch tape from 8 at night until 2 in the morning. Now, who's with my family at that time? You know, not me, that's for sure. And again, that's not healthy, that's unbalanced. And again, God's looking for balance in our lives. And again, by watching that tape, though, and looking for that one more thing, one more thing, one more thing, when is enough enough? You know, it almost gets to be a superstition almost to a certain degree, and I believe that's the way Satan uses the culture to breed divorce, to breed kids that grow up without fathers and mothers, and we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. So anyway, we're going to talk about this neat thing is later on we're going to talk about if you have any unturned stones that you don't really need. But right now, let's hone in on and get on a dry erase board when you do this, or use a huge easel and a sheet of paper and put in there how many hours in a day. Write 24. And then say not 36, even though they wish it was. Say 24. Okay, how many hours in a week? 168. Okay, well, how many hours are there in a year? Well, there's 8,736. Okay, and then there's one more stat that I throw in there that's not in the book. We found out there's a study done that on the average person lives 25,000 plus days in their lifetime. That's what they get, 25,500 something like that. So understand that there is a finite amount of time available to do what they do. Now, the reality is this last sentence on here on page 19. Your priorities determine how you utilize, and this is the part we emphasize, the time that God has given you. Whose time is it? It's God's time. That's right. It's not your time. It's not the parents' time. It's not the school district's time. It's God's time. It's God's money. It's God's everything. Well, when we realize that, again, we only have a finite amount of time. And everybody always talks about, you know, you got to live like you're dying. Well, we don't know when that's going to be, but we need to understand that we need to have our priorities determine the amount of time, how we use the amount of time God has given us. So our priorities become very, very important. And that leads us into that extra point question of how many unturned stones do you have and are they necessary? Now, I need to tell you a little story. I was an offensive coordinator at university, and I had a good friend of mine who was a well-known and very well-renowned offensive coordinator and an expert in his field. And I got to be good friends with him. And one night we were talking about game plans and how he writes game plans for his kids and his quarterbacks. And it was amazing that I was only at that time writing basically one game plan. Well, this guy was writing 2 game plans, sometimes 3. He'd write one game plan for his quarterback if he was doing well, and then he'd write another game plan for his quarterback if he was struggling, and then he'd write one more game plan if the guy got just really hot and was able to do all sorts of things. So I thought, boy, you know, that's a pretty good idea. That'll give me an edge. So at this point, I decided that I was going to not just write 3 game plans, but I'm going to write 5, because I'll do the 3 he did, and in addition to that, I'll outwork him and I'll do 2 more, one for the backup quarterback and then one for the 3rd string quarterback. Now, how sick is that? And it's real sick, but the reality is that's what the culture breeds. And again, you're probably sitting there right now if you're a football coach saying, boy, that's pretty smart. But the reality is, when was I doing those game plans? I was doing until 4 in the morning on Thursday nights. And by the way, Thursday night is supposed to be my date night with my wife. And if you don't know what date night is, you better find out, because you're supposed to have one of those once a week with your spouse. But again, that's what a story that you can share with me about unturned stones. How much videotape do I need to watch? And ask those guys and gals to make a list of things that they could maybe delegate, things that they could let go and let God take care of, and things that really don't need their attention that maybe someone else could do. And if they don't have any help, find ways to create help through parents, through student athletes, through anything. And of course, in good judgment, but that's what we mean by unturned stones.